Hi everyone, I'm Sheila. Welcome back to The Truth About Death and Dying. I wanted to always start off my podcast just throwing out a disclaimer that I'm not an expert in anything, but I do have experience with death and dying and the grief process. I wanted to just follow up on episode 3 and give a couple more resources for caregivers. If you are in the situation where you are looking for some additional help, there are home care service companies that are wonderful because they do background checks and extensive interviews and check references. And they also can send backup. If you're a regular caregiver, most people want one person to come in. That's usually the goal, is to have one person come in and take care of your loved one. Can't always happen. But with a home care company, they typically have a good staff on standby for you, so they can get someone there to help you if needed. And if you go with a private caregiver, which is also, an option, you're going to just work directly with that person. Whether or not you can do a background check on them or check references and whatnot, that will all fall on you. With a home care service, the caregivers are getting paid about half of what you're paying for the service. The company's going to take half. They pay their caregivers typically half of what they're taking in. With a private caregiver, all the money you pay them is going directly into their pocket. But a downside to that is if your caregiver calls in sick or has to be out for an extended period of time, that burden is going to fall back onto you. And so you're going to have to find backup help on your own. So there's, upsides and downsides to both options. And the other option is a death doula, which is not really new, but it's kind of coming into the spotlight, I think, a little bit. And a death doula is an independent contractor who will basically serve as a caregiver, sort of. They'll come in and help, but more of a resource. I think it depends on the doula, what they're going to do for you, and the price will depend on the individual doula. I will do my best to put up some resources for you during this video. I'm still learning the editing process with all this stuff, so but I will do my best to get you that information one way or the other. And so I just wanted to touch on that just a little bit before we get started on the next topic. And this topic I want to talk about today is final wishes. Final wishes are super important if you are the primary caregiver for someone that you love that is dying. Final wishes can vary person to person. And so if you have the opportunity to have a conversation with the person you're taking care of, please do that. My father was very open about talking about death and dying. I'm very open about talking about death and dying. It was never a problem with our scenario. But other people are very freaked out about talking about death. They think if they talk about it, it's going to happen. Or, it's kind of a weird thing with people talking about death. Some just won't even say the word death. When I went through hospice training to be a volunteer years, and it was years ago. I think it was hospice. I also did a grief support group for kids called Pathfinders in the Bangor area in Maine. And I can't remember which training it was. It could have been both trainings. I'm not even sure now. It's been so long since I went through the training. But we had to say the words death, dying, dead. Like, we had to make that a part of our vocabulary, because they often want to say, oh, they passed away, or, they left us, or any number of other things besides the finality of death. They died. So I'm perfectly comfortable talking about death and dying to people, and but not everybody is. And often they will say, oh, so-and-so passed away, or that, because it sounds nicer than they're dead. So death is a part of life. That's a fact. We all owe a death. We're all going to die. None of us are getting out of here alive. So if you can talk to the person that is dying that you're taking care of openly, oh, God bless you, because that is a big deal. Um, Final wishes are important for several reasons. For one, if the person that's dying knows what they want to be cremated, or they want to be buried, or they want to have a Viking send off, whatever it is, it's important to try to honor those wishes the best you can. Obviously, a Viking send off probably isn't going to happen, because I don't think, well, unless you do it on a lake and no one catches you in time, but traditionally, people want to either be cremated or they're going to be buried. That's the long short of it. So in my father's case, he wanted to be buried. He wanted to have an open casket. I don't think we had the open casket at the funeral, but we did at the wake. And then, he was buried in a plot. And my father had arranged all of that when he first came back to Bangor after he lived downstate for 25, close to 30 years. He sold his property, moved back to Bangor, where he worked and raised his family, and where all of us, his kids, lived in the area. So when he first came back, he and I went to the funeral home, and he set up a trust, picked out his casket, nothing fancy, just, nice, but not overly pricey. Got everything in place. Bought the plot that he would be buried in, bought the headstone, got everything taken care of ahead of time. And this was long before he was even, diagnosed with a terminal illness. So it was just in place. He just thought, he was coming up to his 80s and thought, this is something I need to do, which, let me tell you, is a humongous gift to give your family. Sounds strange, but it's not strange, because when the person gets to the point, so you're taking care of somebody that's dying. You haven't had a conversation with them about final wishes, about anything. And now they've died. And now everything falls on you and whoever is in your support group to make those decisions. Do we bury them? Do we cremate them? Do we, do we have a funeral? Do we have a celebration of life? What do we want to do? That is a lot to take on when someone you love has just died. It's too much to take on. And let me tell you something. I don't want to diss funeral homes, because they provide a wonderful service for people, but also it's a racket. It is a racket. And if you haven't already made those decisions about what kind of casket or urn or whatever you're deciding to do, they're going to try to upsell you. They're going to play on your grief, and they're going to try to upsell you. And I'm sorry if this pisses off the people who run those kind of services, but it's a fact. And if they were being honest, they would tell you that. When my grandmother died, my mother's mother died, my grandmother was a very humble person, wasn't flashy, didn't have a lot of money, didn't live that way. So she basically picked out a pine box, more or less, not really, but very modest, affordable casket to be buried in. And when my mother and her sisters went to the funeral home to kind of, finalize the service and everything, they tried to upsell them to a fancier casket. And this is what happens. And luckily, where my dad had all his final, they didn't do that, because I was ready. I was prepared for them to try to upsell us, and I was going to have to put the hammer down on that. But they will do that. They will prey on your grief, and it's horrible, because they'll be like, oh, don't you think your mama needs to have this $10,000 casket? Don't you think she deserves that? God, no. She doesn't want a $10,000 casket that you got to pay for, that she's just going to be in the ground. Her body's just going to be in the ground in. No. Truly, we just need a pine box. That's all we need. But anyway, that's just my opinion about that. Now, maybe they want to be cremated, which is a whole different story. But in my experience with my father, he wanted a traditional funeral. So I was grateful that was all worked out long before he was ever diagnosed or sick or anything. Didn't even have to think about it. So one of the things that is important when you're coming up on someone their impending death is the obituary. Are you going to put an obituary in the paper? Are you not going to put an obituary? And let me tell you something. An obituary is very expensive. I think it's, in my area, $1.25 a word, per word. $1.25 per word. It's ridiculous. And again, I feel like people who are grieving are going to pay the money to give the person that died the proper send off. So that's why I think when you see like a really big obituary, people have money and they don't care. We did do quite a lengthy obituary for my dad because he had kind of half paid for it, and then we kicked in the rest to cover the rest. But so I like to know, and I don't like to see an obituary in the paper. Obviously, that's not what I mean by that. But if someone has died, I want to read about them. I want to know a little bit about who this person was. And I'm one of those weirdos that reads the obituary like every day in the paper. But that's how I find out if my friend's parents are died, or a classmate, or someone else, and sometimes that's the only notification you get, that this person has died. So it's, even if it's just a little blip to let people know. I think that's important too. So when my father got his terminal illness diagnosis, it was 2020, March of 2020, the first, like early March 2020. So COVID was just starting to hit, and but we weren't really in the thick of it yet. And so my dad got his terminal diagnosis, and I said to him, Dad, you know what? I think we should have a party. I think we should because a funeral is, the intention is to celebrate the person's life, right? So I thought, well, we have the opportunity to celebrate your life while you're still here to enjoy it. And you can hear all the nice things that people want to say about you. And so my father was on board immediately. So I got all the things in motion to have this party. And then COVID hit, and they put down the restrictions that you couldn't have groups larger than like whatever, 6 or 8 people. So I was like, well, that's not going to work. So we had to put that kind of on hold. We hoped on hold, but we never ended up being able to do that just because of circumstances. But I wish we had that chance where my dad's friends and family members were able to come, kind of say their goodbyes, and just give them the opportunity to say whatever they wanted to say to him, and for him to be able to receive that love and all that. But it didn't work. So if you have that opportunity to do it, oh my God, I think you should do that. If the person you're taking care of would be agreeable to that, I think that would be fantastic. Because I feel like it's sad that people wait until you're dead before they say nice things to you or about you, and maybe you can hear them and maybe you can't. I don't know. So I felt like that was such a missed opportunity for us, but we had no control over COVID, God forbid. So the final wishes are super important. But I think there's a few things that can be not overlooked, but do your best to honor their final wishes. But I think sometimes people will say, oh, I don't want to have a funeral. I don't want a funeral. I don't want anything. I just throw me in the ground or put me in an urn or whatever they're going to do. They don't want any kind of anything, like just nothing. And I find to me, that's so sad. But I think part of the reason people don't want a funeral is because, honestly, I think they don't think anyone's going to come. Like, for whatever reason, they think, oh, I was a horrible person, or I wasn't nice enough, or whatever reason. I think a bit of that is they don't think anyone's going to come. And the other piece is, I think they feel like it's going to be too costly for the family, which it is. It absolutely is. So if this is stuff that you can put in place ahead of time and do a trust and put money into it, that's fantastic, because people should be honored. They should be, when they die, there should be some recognition of your life. When people are born, like when babies are born, people celebrate, they bring gifts, and everyone's so happy that they're here. But then when they die, it's just like, oh, that's it, they're gone. No, they lived a whole life, and that life should be celebrated. So while I don't fully agree when people are like, I don't want a funeral, I don't want anything. Okay. But funerals and celebrations of life are for the living. They're not for the dead. And I think people need to get their heads wrapped around that, because it will give you a new perspective on it. When you die, you're gone. Now, whatever your beliefs are beyond this realm that we're in right now is irrelevant, really. But the bottom line is, I don't think once you're dead, you care anymore. Whether you reincarnate, or you go to heaven, or you're just dirt in the ground, I don't think you care. So my cousins, my father lost his brother and his sister, or I should say, my family lost an aunt, an uncle, and our dad, all siblings, within 11 months of each other. It was a really, really tough year for us. My aunt died first in March, and again, COVID was running rampant still. She died in 2021, but COVID was still, people weren't traveling still, and there were bans traveling state to state, and unless you had been vaccinated and have proof of it and all this stuff. So my aunt died. Her wishes were to have a closed casket. She did not want an open casket. One of my cousins, so she had two sons, and she still has two sons, but the two sons had to make the decision. And one son wanted to have an open casket, and the other son wanted to honor his mother's wishes. So I was asked to weigh in. I didn't just put my opinion in there, which I will do from time to time, but I didn't on this particular case. And I just gave them my thought about how I don't think that my aunt really, now that she was gone, would really care if they wanted to have an open casket. For me, I've been going to funerals since I was like 5 years old, open caskets. And for me personally, to go to a funeral and see the person that I loved lying in a casket, and I can see that they're like, that for me is closure that is helpful for me. It's not helpful for everybody, but it is helpful for me. But like, we all need that closure. And I think the one cousin that wanted to have the open casket, I think that was part of his thought process, was it's closure for people. They can see that she's gone, and they can, touch her and kiss her, or whatever they want to do to kind of say their goodbyes. So they ended up going with an open casket, and I told them, I said, I'll take the blame. If anyone has to take the blame and she wants to haunt someone, she can come haunt me. I don't think she's going to. She hasn't, so I think she's fine with it. But it's but their emotions are high, and when you get family dynamics coming into the scenario, it can make it really difficult. So if the person has their basic final wishes intact, written down, settled, that's really important. But if part of that is that they didn't want a funeral or they didn't want a celebration of life, I really feel like you can ignore that a bit. And I'm not saying ignore the funeral, because the funeral is a different thing, but a celebration of life is another thing. The funeral is very kind of ritualistic, and you have the casket, and you have the minister, you say the prayers, and people talk, and then they go to the graveyard and they bury him, and it's a whole thing. And if the person that is dying doesn't want that, respect that. That I 100% respect that. But to not offer people the opportunity to come together and celebrate the life of the person that just died, I feel like that is really doing everyone a disservice, because people need that opportunity to gather, to laugh about stuff, funny stories or other things, whatever it is. But it's an opportunity to come together and grieve as a group for the person that made an impact in your life. And I find that when people don't want to do anything, I find that to be so sad. I find it to be really sad. I feel like it's not honoring the person that died and their life that they lived, or, giving the opportunity to the people that love them the chance to say goodbye. And other people, some people don't want to grieve in public. They want to grieve in private. They don't want to talk about it. They just want to bury it, and that's it. And that's fine. They don't have to go. But people like me, I want to be around other people that love this person. I want to hear their stories. I want to hear their jokes, or not the jokes, but, like the funny stories or anecdotes or whatever, I want to hear all that. I want to be a part of that and come together as a group who love that person. So that's just kind of my take on, final wishes. And yes, you should honor them. But I think that if they really are like, I don't want anything, okay, send them off knowing that you're not going to do anything. But if you want to do a celebration of life at, somebody's house, someone's backyard, that's fine. I think that's fine. And I don't think that the person that died is going to care at all. So that's just my take there. Death and dying and funerals and all that are really important for a lot of reasons, I think. And when there's small children involved, I want to talk about the rituals of funerals and whatnot. I did grief support for several years my group was teenagers, and the grief support group that we worked with different ages. So we broke the children down into little kids, and then 5 to 7, and so on and so forth. And I had the teenagers, and kids grieve differently, but they still grieve. And so it's important for them to be a part of the funeral process or the celebration of life process. They need to be included in that. I think a lot of parents don't want to talk to their children about it because it's just an unpleasant conversation to have. And I think a lot of parents want to just wait till their kids are older where they can understand death and all that. But the truth of the matter is, kids are smarter than we give them credit for, first of all, and they're perceptive. Even if no one talks about the fact that Grampy just died, they know something's different. They can feel it. They sense it. It's not, you can't hide things from children. If you live in the same house and you are grieving as an adult, your kids are going to feel that. So it would benefit them to have a conversation about it, about death. And, and again, death is a part of life. We're all going to die. You might die long before your time, for any number of reasons. So to not educate your children about that and your beliefs on what happens when you die, even if we don't know, it's all a guessing game, really. I mean, we all have different opinions about what happens, and some of it's faith-based and some of it's just scientific-based, and it's not right or wrong, but whatever your feelings are, you should share those with your children to give them at least a baseline of, the death process. There are books out there that you can find about talking to your children about grief and death and all that. But children are going to grieve too. And I was thinking about it the other day, and children in a way are like your pets in their perception of things that are going on when they maybe don't understand fully. I had a dog and a cat, and they were very close. And in fact, the cat liked the dog better than she liked anyone else. And we had to put the dog down. And do you think we had a conversation with the cat about it? Or that the cat was going to understand what we were saying? No. But the cat was visibly grieving. She was lethargic, and she was like, where'd my dog go? My dog went, you took the dog and you didn't bring her back, and where is she? So my cat had her own grieving process, and I really believe, and maybe you think I'm crazy, and that's fine, because most people think I'm crazy, but the cat visibly was grieving for the dog. And it took her some time to get over it. And then finally she was like, I guess you guys are okay. I guess I'll hang out with you. But the bottom line is, the cat sensed that the dog wasn't coming back. And she was sad about that. And kids are the same way. Even if you're not talking about, or you don't think they hear and they take in so much more than you understand. So I think it's really important to include your children in the whole process of the funeral or celebration of life, going to the graveside, watching them, put the body into the ground. It's all super important for their growth and, and well-being. They need to be surrounded by the same people who love this person that died. At my father's funeral, my granddaughter, who at the time was about 4.5, she knew her Gigi and loved him. And so my daughter Emily brought her to the wake. And Emily and I I don't even think it occurred to me to have a conversation with her about the fact that it was going to be an open casket for the wake. So when, and wakes are very busy, and people are coming and hugging and talking and all that stuff. So when I finally located Emily, she had lowered herself to her daughter's eye level, and they were in the midst of a quiet conversation. And so I stepped up, dropped down to join the conversation at eye level with my granddaughter. And Emily looked at me and she said, "We didn't know that it was going to be an open casket wake tonight." And I was just explaining to Coco that Gigi's body is there, but his spirit's gone. And, but Emily handled it so well. And I was so proud of her because she didn't make a big deal about it. She didn't go, "Oh my God, you did, he's a dead body." She didn't panic. She didn't freak out. She just dropped down, looked her daughter in the eye, and just explained very calmly what was happening. And I was just so proud of her for handling it the way she did. And, after she had the conversation, and we were just all very matter of fact, yep, Gigi died, but this is his body. His spirit's gone. And, 10 minutes later, this kid was running crazy through the funeral home with her cousins, and everything was cool. It was not a big deal. Emily didn't make a big deal about it, and her daughter didn't freak out about it. So it was all good. And, I honestly would recommend if your child has not experienced any death in their life, it doesn't matter how old they are. If they haven't experienced any death with pets or family members, you're lucky. You're really lucky. But get a fish. Buy a fish, because that fish is probably going to die. And then you can have a conversation about life and death, and, it's just part of life. So, but because you don't want your child to get to the point where it's a big death and they have no means to cope with it at all. That's really hard, And when I did the grief support group, it happened a lot. There were a couple of kids that, their parents died instantly, and these are teenagers that just suddenly their parent is gone. And it was really tough for them, and one girl I had in my group, the start of every group, we would go around and say who you were and why you were there. So it would be like, "Hi, I'm Sheila. My dad died." That's all you had to say. And we went around the group, and this one girl, she couldn't even say those words. She couldn't even say the words, "My dad died." She couldn't get them out. And then as the group progressed, she was able to not only say that her dad died, but laugh and tell stories and really celebrate the life that he had, as short as it was. So it's horrible. It's horrible. I'm not trying to make it some, fancy thing or fun thing to do, but it happens. And sometimes it happens suddenly, and sometimes it goes longer. It's a disease that slowly takes them. So, regardless of the child, your child's age or your grandchild's age, or whoever you have in your family that are young people, I would recommend having a conversation with them before the funeral, especially if you're in that situation now. I'm sure the child is aware that, whoever it is that you're taking care of is dying. So I hope you will make them a part of that process and include them, because it's important. It's important for them to watch you in your grief process. And it's okay for them to see you cry over the loss of someone that you really loved. That's okay, because they're going to see you cry, and they're going to see you recover from that, and they're going to watch you. They're always watching you and how you handle things, and they're going to emulate you because that's all they know. So don't be afraid to cry in front of your child because your parent's dying, or your grandfather's dying, or your aunt, or whoever it is. It's okay to express that grief visibly for your children or your grandchildren to see. It's okay. It's healthy for them. It's healthy for them to see, so they have something to go by, so that they know how to release that. It's not okay to keep that in. It's not good to keep that in. You should release those tears. It's hard for people to cry, and it's hard to cry in front of other people. So, but I just want to tell you, it's okay. It's okay to cry. So, I hope this was beneficial for you today, and I wish you peace and love and happiness, and I hope that this process is a gentle one for you. And if you have any comments, or you want to come on and share your story, I would love that. On YouTube, if you look under my contact information, you can find my email address. I would love to hear from you. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.